Hello, dear listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my co-host, Marie Mayhew. Marie,
Chris,
how's it going?
I have an issue.
What's your issue?
I have an issue. Issue is like minutes before this podcast, I was endeavoring to engineer a prefabricated cat scratch house made out of cardboard.
Sure.
And I'm gonna come clean and be honest. Here's my diatribe about this. I failed miserably like that. There's no labels on any of these pieces of cardboard. Nothing's fitting together. Like, I'm gonna end up duct taping this thing together. The cat's already looking at me like I'm insane. Sorry, I literally put it down because I'm like, oh my God, I have to podcast. I have fought with this for the last 2.5 hours.
Nice. Well, sounds like a really good use of your time.
You're like,
I'm excited about
story.
it. I'm excited about it. It's good stuff. You know, we actually just took an Amazon box. We cut some holes into the side, and then Katie wrote on it, "hissing booth." And it's the cats. It's Seaborg's little place.
Aww.
And now when people come over, they're like, "What's that?" And Katie's like, "That's Fort Idiot." And then Seaborg will stick her head out, like all proudly, like, "Yeah, it's Fort Idiot," like having a great time.
See, but that's the ingenuity I think I need, because like I went on Amazon, I bought this, and the reason I bought it, and here's the hook, is it had a plastic dome on top.
Oh.
So the cats could look up through said plastic dome, because really that's what cats really love doing, right? Is like doing exactly what you plan on them doing.
Right. Right.
Yes. So why not pay premium dollar for the plastic dome that will never be actually physically assembled into this monstrosity that's now.
I'll tell you what's going to look really good on that plastic dome, Marie. It's cat vomit. All right. Speaking of reverse engineering something that you have no business or qualifications to do, this episode, we're talking about Bob Lazar in Element 115.
And okay, again, full disclosure, I have no idea about any of this stuff, which normally doesn't stop me before, but now I'm admitting it. I don't know who Bob Lazar is. I don't have any kind of frame of reference really with his. I know he's in the UFO environs, but I don't know what he does, and I certainly didn't know anything about this new element.
Okay, so
I'm ready.
This is one of those episodes where I was on the UFO Facebooks, I got hot, and I haven't been able to get unhot. I haven't been able to release the heat and the anger until we do this episode, so let's get into it. Jake, roll the tape. Welcome to the Mad Scientist Podcast. Today's episode, Element 115.
Because nothing says holiday, peace, love, and understanding quite like a Mad Scientist Go Deep episode on any particular subject.
Quite like approximately 300 pounds of hairy Italian Canadian man screaming at the peak of my lung capacity about aliens. All right,
that does say holiday.
That's how I've known every holiday for the last 28 years of my life. So
God, I'm getting teared up. That's like eggnog. That's lights. And then just Chris Cogswell screaming about alien fraud.
All right. So
shaking it off.
Okay. So
I'm ready.
For those that don't know or haven't been following kind of the recent Bob Lazar info or the recent UFO world, right? You may not follow it as hard as I have. So Bob Lazar has recently come back into kind of has come back into the forefront because of a documentary by Jeremy Corbell, or Corbell, I think is how you say his last name. Which
and who is Bob
is a
Lazar
show
to begin with?
Yeah, so we're going to get into that. Obviously, we're going to get into that. But so,
oh God, sorry.
No, it's okay. So the documentary is called Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. So Bob Lazar is a really, I'd say, polarizing figure in the UFO community. Now, you may have never heard of Bob Lazar, but I guarantee you've heard of what he brought into the public lexicon, which is Area 51.
Oh, I have heard of Area 51.
Sure. So, Robert Scott Bob Lazar Was born
You know
January.
why I don't trust him right away? 3 first names.
Yeah, it's scary. He was born January 26, 1959 in Coral Gables, Florida. Now, he kind of shot to prominence because he made claims on George Knapp had a segment on KLAS about UFOs, about kind of weird stories and things. And so Knapp was doing a story about the kind of, the secret space program and whatever. And so this guy showed up under the name Dennis. And he claimed his face was hidden and things. And he claimed that he worked at S4, which was a kind of like a facility within a facility of Area 51.
Ooh, even a more secret.
Right.
More covert secret
now,
area.
this facility was supposedly near Papoose Lake, which is south of Groom Lake, which is kind of the main Area 51 area. And supposedly it had these huge aircraft hangars built into the mountainsides and sort of almost decoyed in such a way. I mean, not really decoyed, built into the mountainside in such a way that you wouldn't notice it unless you were basically right on top of it. Right? So you can imagine like a sheer mountain face cliff. You wouldn't necessarily see an opening in it if you were looking at it from a distance because of the way the shadows are and kind of the nooks and crannies inside of a mountainside. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, his story goes that he first was introduced to this area by becoming. So he was originally a photographer. He developed film and he was a photographer. Okay, and so that was like in the 1980s, right? He was a photographer. He had some training. It seemed like in physics and electronics, which we're going to get into more and more as we go through. And said that he had already worked at Los Alamos, which is a national laboratory in New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And so that was previous to him being a kind of a photographer and doing this kind of, secondary business sort of stuff. He sent a resume out to a person that he supposedly knew from when he was actually shooting himself off in rocket bikes, like kind of like rocket car kind of stuff in the desert. Right. And
well, we've all done that. I mean, we can't hold that against him. Right.
So the story goes that he went to a conference and someone was like, well, look at this guy in the desert here with his rocket bike. And then there's rocketry stuff, whatever. And Lazar went up to him afterwards and said, hey, that guy's me. Like, I'm the one with the rocket shoes. We're being a little facetious, but essentially that's how it supposedly went. And so they kept in touch. This guy
rocket shoes are actually kind of cool. Like, I would not hold that wholeheartedly against anybody.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Those are cool, right? And it wasn't really rocket shoes. It was like it was messing around with rockets in the desert, right? Mm-hmm. And so he became kind of, friendly with this physicist, Dr. Edward Teller. And so that's the guy that kind of met him at the conference and said, this was a cool story about kind of physics going on out in the trenches, right? And this guy was like, I was that guy. So
do we know was he really that guy, or did he just say he was that guy? Is there any conclusive proof that he was that guy?
He was actually that guy.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine.
I've already tried to tear it apart.
That's like one of the few parts of the story that has any kind of verification at all.
Oh, okay.
So then he claimed that he sent his resume over to Dr. Teller, and Teller said, I actually do have a job that you might be interested in. It requires some. It's going to be a little weird, right? But if you keep an open mind, I think it's gonna kind of let you do the kind of physics work you want to do. And so he told Bob to go to an airport, essentially, and go there, just have a briefcase and whatever, have the kind of the stuff he wanted to do for work, have a form of ID, right, all this kind of stuff, and then they would fly him from there to the military base where he would be doing work. And then they would be transporting him from there to the other facility where his job would actually be every day. And now there are airplanes that travel to and from Area 51 that are unmarked, right? That actually, so that part at least is something that's plausible that he could have actually been doing. And there is a bus supposedly that travels between Area 51 and the other sites around there. Okay. Now, when he gets there, supposedly this military kind of, guy, whatever, tells him, okay, well, we're going to have you read the stuff in this room, and then we're going to see how you react to it and what you think. And then we're basically going to give you an interview. Okay?
Okay.
And so they leave him there, and he is reading, like, the files are all about aliens and UFOs and how the government has back-engineered them in some way. Okay? And so the story goes that he is a whistleblower then from Area 51 who saw gray aliens, who saw UFOs, who saw the anti-gravity technology that went with this stuff, right? And that it's all powered by an element that he called element 115 that he claimed would be a stable, super heavy element, the first of its kind, and would essentially be able to be used in a certain way to cause gravity waves to propagate in an interesting way, and essentially like create a zone of negative gravity in front of the ship to cause it to push forward, to cause it to like get sucked in, almost like how if you have an area of low pressure from an area of high pressure behind it, it'll push stuff forward. And
that would work in space.
The idea was that it would work anywhere where there was a gravity field that could be altered. Right, it's like a magnetic field, right? If the magnetic field was strong enough, it could overcome the force. It could overcome the force of gravity.
Okay.
Right, just like in this case, it would be the same thing. It would just be a gravity wave overcoming, weight and mass and whatever. Okay, now here,
can I ask one quick question?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So here's my question: so the job interview, right? So this guy who he's met, who liked his hijinks in the desert, said he's got this job for him, right? So I make sure I'm tracking so far. And what he's got to do is he's got to show up with a briefcase to a airport, and then he's going to be taken from said airport somewhere else, and then deployed even somewhere else again.
Yes.
So my thing is, it's like, why is this? Does this, like, this seems like a trope in a lot of, just like, if you tell me about this, like, why is there so many, like, why does it have to be so convoluted? Like, really, like, I mean, isn't it possible that the most nefarious plots that could be, thought up by our secret pocket government within, our actual agencies are just, you just show up at a building or something? Like, I don't understand why there's always this, like, very long, convoluted, like...
Right, you go through the door that opens that has the... Right,
it's all Men in Black,
the
right?
grate, and then the net, and then the, the metal things, and then... Yeah, it's all
you have
very,
to show
like...
up here, and you don't know anything about it. It's like you never just get to show up to an address or to a nondescript building and just, like, go to work in a room or something. So that's why it's like, I don't understand... stories, because one, I don't necessarily think that any agency works like that. Having worked for a lot of bureaucracies, nobody's got that much energy, even to keep secrets. Sorry.
No, well, I'm also giving the best case reading of Bob Lazar's story. He claimed that when they closed the door on him in that room, there was an alien poster on the door that said "They're here."
So they're funny too. So they have all of this covert meow meow meow, and then they're humorous on top of it.
There's irony.
You don't get both.
I mean, Marie, you got to be ironic. Now
you don't get both. No, you don't. You don't get the trope and get to be ironic about said trope. If this is your story, that doesn't happen. Especially, like, when was this? The 50s? When was it again?
No, this was the 80s.
80s. Oh no, definitely not.
No. So he then claimed that. Okay, so he comes out and he's like, he thinks that they're gonna come to him and say, like, what'd you think? And he's going to be like, if he says that he thinks this alien stuff is real, they're going to tell him he's crazy and then kick him out. Right? He thinks they're pulling his leg, is what he says. Yes. But when he's like, this deal seems kind of crazy, like, where's your proof for any of this stuff? They bring him to a room where the UFOs are. And he
room where said UFOs
are. Well, like a bunker where the UFOs are, right? So, okay. Now, he claims, he agrees to do it, whatever. And so the job that he was hired for was to basically reverse engineer alien crafts. Okay? Now, to do this, he signed away all of his constitutional rights, which was done under executive order by Reagan. Okay?
because Reagan had all that kind of time.
Right. He agreed essentially to have all of his rights taken away. He agreed to be surveilled 24/7. He agreed to have like his phone taps and stuff and everything else. They do medical tests on him to ensure he wasn't, taking material out, and also to make sure that he was kind of not getting affected by, whatever they're working on.
Excuse me, I just had to clear my throat because this is so hard to swallow.
Right. Sorry. Well, and then this is my favorite part of the story. They said that they would give him a gun, but that it would be a $500 charge to him if he lost the gun. And he was like, now that's crazy. And he didn't want the gun.
So, but why do you even need a gun? Basically, you're under 24/7 surveillance. What are you going to do? You've signed away your rights.
I don't know, a coyote? I don't know, Marie. I don't know.
Cactus? So where are they? Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm already mired in the weeds on this one, but like, I'm assuming they're in the desert someplace, hypothetically.
Yeah, they're at Area 51. So they're like in the middle of the desert.
Okay, they're in the middle of the desert, and he signed away all of his rights on Reagan signed on his stationery and said, yes, Area 51 executive order, you will not have any identity, you will not have any rights. I mean, so why a gun? Why bother with a gun? And where are you going to go? Like, it's not like he's going to go anywhere. Like, why, sir? If you're surveilling him, it's almost like overkill. It's like he's not doing anything. If he's, oh God, okay, sorry.
I don't know. So anyway,
damn it, Chris! My blood pressure was just like leveling off from the damn cat scratch box house.
Now it's supposedly
no,
where he lived near Edwards Air Force Base. Where he would then
he was off, so he lived off campus.
Exactly. Well, so everyone does. That's the whole thing, is that everyone does, and then they take these kind of nondescript planes over to Area 51 to work.
No way.
Yeah.
No way. Okay, keep going.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
So, okay. So the idea here, is that essentially, so okay. So this Air Force, this airplane site, these airlines that actually travel to and from Area 51, it's a real thing. It's called Janet. Janet Flight 211 leaves McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas most mornings at about 3:30 a.m. It operates in an unlabeled Boeing 737-600 aircraft with no markings on its tail and no logos on its chest. Instead, it bears only a long, unbroken red stripe on either side of its body. Janet's 211's destination, like all Janet flights, is officially listed as the Tonopah Test Range, a retired military installation in the Nevada desert. But according to flight trackers and observers, its real destination is Groom Lake, home to the mysterious military site known as Area 51. So Janet is actually it actually is the Area 51 employee shuttle.
I don't doubt that. Like, I don't doubt that they have aircraft that travel there. I think my question is, if they have you mired in all of this stuff, you're going to reverse engineer alien everything, alien technology.
Well, yeah. Why aren't they flying you home in a UFO?
Site. No, well, forget that. They're not. You're not getting away from them. I mean, has anybody watched this last season of Better Call Saul? Did you? No?
I didn't, but I'm not going to.
Somebody out there will have watched it, and basically, if there's any sort of money invested in any type of anything, they're not letting you out of their sight. They're like keeping you someplace sequestered until the job is done, and then maybe you survive after that. But I mean, like, come on, this is one of the singular biggest advents in the history of humans. And they're gonna just let you maybe hop up something to Vegas.
Well, so that's actually I should fix an error we said earlier. He was living in Vegas at the time. He was living near Vegas. All right. Okay. So
yeah, he's in Vegas.
He is in Vegas,
and so he goes. Okay.
So here's what happens then. Okay,
I'm de-escalating. I'm calming down. Sorry,
no, it's fine. He kind of gets supposedly his memory gets manipulated and kind of wiped and back and forth and whatever. Okay. He then kind of starts blabbing to his buddies and telling people like, "Hey, I work at this secret place. Like, check out this crazy stuff I work on." And through that, then he starts to discuss this stuff with George Knapp, who is this if you know anything about the UFO field, he is a very well-known kind of reporter of UFOs, kind of a serious reporter that takes these things seriously, works through Las Vegas. And so he was in a documentary by George Knapp called UFOs: The Best Evidence that first aired in November of 1989, where Bob Lazar is kind of talking about all this stuff. Now,
that's some lax government agency. I thought he was under surveillance 24/7.
Well, okay, so now here is so since that time now, Bob Lazar has kind of gone out there and stated, all this stuff about stated all this stuff about Area 51, about seeing gray aliens there from the Zeta Reticuli star system. Basically, all of the things you know about modern ufology could have essentially come from the mind of this one guy, right? Whether or not you believe it's true or not, yeah, seriously, it all came from Bob Lazar, right? Yeah. Before Bob Lazar, there was no, there was, of course, discussions about. Let me put it this way, right? All that stuff was out there kind of in the mythos, but Bob Lazar crystallized it down to a cohesive story of the gray aliens crashed and we took their technology and then we signed a treaty with them to work with them. And so the grays are from Zeta Reticuli. They come to Earth. They help us, whatever. And we're reverse engineering their stuff. Like all of the secret space program bunk comes from Bob Lazar. Without Bob Lazar, there may have been people that said, well, maybe it's the government doing this. But I tend to think there would be a lot more people saying the government doesn't know what they're talking about with this. The government doesn't know. And that's kind of the uncomfortable position that the kind of UFO field finds itself in right now is you have To the Stars Academy saying the government doesn't know what they're talking about with these UFOs. And then you have Bob Lazar, who's coming back into the forefront saying the government knows all of it. And I hung out with aliens. I hung out with gray aliens in my free time at work, right? I hung out with them in the lunchroom.
When I wasn't hitting the penny slots.
Now, this is from an article from 1997 by Stanton T. Friedman, who, if you listen to the show, is a big hero of mine in the UFO world. So the article is called... and maybe this article you can kind of I like Friedman because his articles are always very nuanced and they let you decide as the reader. Okay, so this article is called "The Bob Lazar Fraud." So this is how it starts. Quote: Incredible claims have been made about Bob Lazar for years. He supposedly is a physicist with an MS in physics from MIT and an MS in electronics from the California Institute of Technology. He was a quote-unquote scientist for Los Alamos National Laboratory and obtained a job back engineering UFOs at a very secret site, S4, near Area 51 in Nevada, through noted physicist, the late Dr. Edward Teller. Supposedly, he figured out how saucers work using element 115, matter, antimatter, etc. He was able to steal a small quantity of 115 from the 500 pounds available, but this was stolen back. There was indeed an announcement in early 2004 about the production of 4 atoms of element 115 by operating a huge European accelerator for many weeks. It has a very short half-life, so there is no way to accumulate pounds of it. He supposedly came forward with his story, despite death threats, because he thought the public has a right to know. Videotapes are available with his claims. It is all bunk. Now, through Friedman's information, okay, so the story of Bob Lazar, the hole started showing up right away. Okay. First off, people are like, dude, you were running a home photography service, like taking pictures of people's kids and stuff. Like you went to work on UFOs after that? Why are you, if that's true, why aren't you making money as a physicist someplace else then? Right? Or, how did you learn all this physics? Because as far as we know, you got a associate's degree in electronics. Right? Like, how did that happen? And he's like, no. So his story, his mythos started to kind of build. And so first he claimed that he got a master's of science in engineering in physics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Okay. Which there is absolutely no record for. There's no record for him even having ever been in Cambridge, Massachusetts, let alone having gone to MIT. Okay. He then claimed that he went to, like I said, that he then got an MS in electronics from Caltech. Now, electronics isn't a degree given outside the associate's level, so I don't really know what he's talking about there. And then, on top of all that, when people started digging in, so what Stanton Friedman was able to find about Bob Lazar was that the only academic credentials he could find, okay, was that he took some electronics courses in the late 70s at Pierce Junior College. Which, there's nothing wrong with Pierce Junior College.
No,
Okay.
no, but it's not. You're not going to walk out of there with a physics, a PhD in physics, though.
No.
Well, maybe you are, but it's just not. It's just he just didn't do that.
No, he didn't. Now, the next thing that he claimed was that, okay, well, I have this, I have the Los Alamos National Lab phone book that has my name on it. That has my name in it. So how would I have gotten there if I'm making all this up?
Well, there's probably a pretty good explanation for it. I mean, that doesn't prove anything.
There's a phenomenal explanation. He was a contractor through Kirk Meyer, who, again, was kind of through the sort of photography, engineering, kind of, like associates level kind of engineering work.
Yeah.
Right, like an what's the word? Not associates level, like an engineering technician, a technician,
tech,
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is again from Stanton Friedman. Quote: he was publicly asked when he got his MS from MIT. He said, "Let me see now. I think it was probably 1982. Nobody getting an MS from MIT would not know the year immediately." He was asked to name some of his professors. He said, "Let's see now. Bill Duxler will remember me from the physics department at Caltech. I located Dr. Duxler. He's a Pierce Junior College physics professor and never taught at Caltech. Lazar was registered in one of his courses at the same time Lazar was supposedly at MIT. Nobody who can go to MIT goes to Pierce Junior College, not to mention the rather long commute between LA and Cambridge, Massachusetts."
So, again, I've got so many questions, just so many questions. Like, so why is this not enough to have some question of credibility to his claims? Like, why is this? I don't understand why. So Bob Lazar, his story is fantastic to begin with, which is okay if you can substantiate any of it with something that is harnessed, right, in provable anything. And if nothing is, if everything is just totally fantastic, then how is he credible? Why do people believe him?
Well, people believe him, Marie, because people don't know enough about the periodic table.
Well, I don't know jack about the periodic table, man, and I still am not buying this.
So now let's talk about Bob Lazar's major claim.
Okay.
Bob Lazar claimed that the element that would be proven, that would kind of make this stuff work, was going to be element 115. Okay. Now, what he said was that it would basically warp space around the craft and cause it to create its own gravitational field. All right? So, the idea was that you could create a very small gravity field around the nucleus of this material. And because, though, it extends past the atoms, so everything, the idea goes that everything would have a gravity field. Right? So essentially, like, imagine that this is what gives things its mass. Right? There's really no good explanation for why where does mass itself as a property kind of come from? Right? It's kind of one of the big unanswered questions of physics still. And so the idea here, or rather, how does gravity affect mass and vice versa? And so, it's a very interesting problem, obviously. And we could do a whole podcast series for years on it. But we're going to do it in like the next 35 to 40 minutes.
Sweet.
Now, he claimed that because this element was so heavy and because of the way that its nucleus was structured, there is something intrinsic about its gravity field. So the thing that gives it mass extended outward away from its normal kind of center of where gravity would occur. So imagine something that imagine imagine this with like magnetism, with a magnetic field, right? Imagine you have a magnet, and so all magnets you know of up to that point are all localized just in like the solid part of the magnet itself.
Right.
And then suddenly you discover one that actually can affect other things outside of the solid portion of the magnet.
Right. Okay. No, I'm with
So-
you. I'm almost thinking of it as an elliptical field.
It is.
around
It is.
would
It
be
is.
reaching. Yeah. Okay.
It is like an elliptical field. So you can imagine imagine the difference between two magnets that only stick together when you physically touch them versus a magnet that's strong enough to pull another magnet towards it from across the room.
Right.
That's almost like the difference that he's trying to claim was between this one thing with normal mass versus this element 115 and its ability to kind of pull things forward from like away using gravity. Okay. Now, what he claimed then was that you could bombard the nucleus of this element with you can bombard it with protons, and that would produce that would also produce antimatter. So he claimed that then you could basically have antimatter and matter colliding, causing tremendous amounts of energy that would fuel the ship, while simultaneously having this gravity wave effect that would propel it forward.
That's a lot going on for one ship, isn't it?
It's a tremendous amount for one ship. Now,
I mean, CERN can't even do both of those things at once.
Yeah. Now, at the time of Bob Lazar, so he also claimed some other things. He said that it was, it had to come from someplace that it could produce it naturally. Okay. He claimed that the government had collected 500 pounds of it. Okay. Which he said would be enough to, power hundreds of crafts for, decades. And then he said that it had a melting temperature of around 1740 Celsius, which is around 3,200 Fahrenheit. Now, here's the thing, okay? When Lazar first made his claims, the periodic table, as far as we knew, had only, the elements had only been discovered up to, element 109. Okay?
Yeah. I'm with you.
But here's the thing about the periodic table. It's just a table of possible elements until we discover them.
Yeah.
Right? So
placeholders.
So what determines an element, or what makes an element is the number of protons inside of its nucleus. Right? So and because of the way that chemistry works, and because of the way that atomic physics works, we know in the periodic table that elements with the same number of basically proton and neutron combination ratios, and the same number of electrons in the shells or orbitals around the around the nucleus, rather, will behave the same way chemically. So they will have similar bonding patterns. They will have there's relatively common trends that occur. They're called periodic trends. It's called a periodic table for a reason, that trends go in certain periods, right? So for instance, any person who's taking high school chemistry, or who has taken high school chemistry and kind of remembers it, knows or should know that the stuff on the left-hand side of the periodic table is more metallic in nature than the stuff on the right-hand side.
Yes.
Okay.
I even remember that. Yes.
And the stuff on the far right side are the noble gases. They don't react with anything.
Gases. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, that's the kind of stuff that Bob Lazar essentially was pointing out. Was, well, if this thing is element 115, then I can count on the periodic table where it has to be. It'll be below bismuth. Okay? And I will know how it should behave.
Well, it's like a predetermined, right?
Exactly.
It has to be that because it goes there.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's like saying that, it's like saying, Marie, that you will, because you know that next Tuesday will exist, that you predicted next Tuesday. Right? There are well-known behaviors that'll happen in the periodic table.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Now, Marie.
Yes.
Okay. The periodic table is arranged into periods and families.
Yes.
The pyramids are the horizontal rows and the families are the vertical rows.
Yes.
Okay. So like we just said, some common families, the metals and the noble gases.
Yes.
Okay. because of the families that things are in and the period that they're in, you can essentially predict all of their properties. But before we even discover the element. Okay?
Yes.
So we know that things in the we know things that in the, we know things that in like the 6th or 7th period will be radioactive.
Because that's where the radioactive things go.
Right. And we know that things in family, the fluorine family or the nitrogen family or the oxygen family will tend to be gases. The fluorine family especially will tend to be gases as you get to the upper levels of the period. So 1, 2, 3, 4, those generally tend to be gases because they're lighter. Yeah. They're literally just lighter than things. Okay?
Yeah.
All that Bob Lazar did was use general chemistry knowledge to predict some, again, very predictable, students that take the AP chemistry test should be able to do the trick Bob Lazar did.
So why does it have any credence? Because I totally agree with you. Why, again, all this is common sense. It's sort of like this is a classification, right? I mean, that's kind of how I would look at it. This is the periodic table is a organizational system. So of course, everything that is like this would fit into this structure.
Yes. So
I don't get why his prediction of this is heralded by anybody of any, that to have any credence besides it makes common sense.
Well, here's the thing, right? So there's a couple of things to this. So first off, too, just to kind of put the nail in the coffin a little bit more on this element 115 stuff, right? Or at least the properties of element 115 that he predicted. Really, he did a bad job of predicting the properties as well because he didn't know enough about quantum mechanics to make the kind of claims about the stability of the nucleus that he wanted to. Now we're gonna get into that more, but so imagine the periodic table is very much so like the days of the week. If you think about a calendar as another kind of periodic table of days. So what I mean by that is, if you're in America, right? If you're just in the West generally, I think, unless you're in some awesome country like Norway or Sweden or wherever, where I don't know, you guys have super cool laws and stuff, but if you're in the United States that on Monday to Friday you go to work. Usually, most people go to work. You know that on Saturday and Sunday you're usually home. Right?
Yes.
That gives a certain property or character to those days of the week.
Yes.
So the same thing is generally true about the periodic table. It's broken up into these kind of chunks where that this period of elements will behave a certain way, this group will behave a different way, and then this next group will behave a different way as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And too, that as you get older, so as the days progress further and further, you're probably not going to be going rock climbing at 85. Right?
Probably not.
You could probably make that prediction pretty well.
Yeah.
Well, the same kind of predictions are true about things in the periodic table. As the elements get up in proton number, so as the number of the element goes up, they get heavier, they get more radioactive, they get less stable, and they get harder and harder to find and synthesize. Right? Or just find anywhere. You can't find them. They're not naturally occurring anymore. So, again, Bob Lazar claiming that element 115 would have certain, it's going to have a high melting point. It's going to, be radioactive partially. It's going to decay, whatever, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he just the stats.
Exactly. That's like saying that I will predict right now on this show that on, the third Wednesday of the year 2015, or 2015, Jesus Christ, Marie, 2025, that I'll be going to work somewhere. Yes. Right? I probably won't be drinking on that Wednesday night.
Probably not.
I will probably be eating dinner with my wife that night.
Yes.
Right? All of that is predictable because things follow a pattern and go in a certain way.
Well, especially, again, that the periodic table is just that. It's something to house and organize.
Right. It's a pattern.
It's a structure, right? You don't, if you follow the structure, it's, like you said, it's a pattern, it's a structure, it's knowable. It's not an unknown thing. So I don't understand. Again, like, I don't get why his prediction of this is anything besides an educated guess about something that would exist.
Well, the next thing is that, again, some of the things that he claimed weren't like it. Think about this. This is 1989, right? You don't have the internet to spread information. You can't just Google element 115 if you want to find out about it, right? You have to go to a library,
Right.
and to find out about an element that had not yet even been discovered in a in a reactor yet, in a collider yet. To get that kind of news, you would have to go to an academic library of a university someplace, right? You'd have to be pretty tuned into this stuff.
Or you'd have to know somebody who was. You're assuming that it was totally his idea.
Well, right. Well, for someone to think of this, you would need to have it. But that doesn't mean just because the idea wasn't widely acceptable or accessible to the public doesn't mean the idea wasn't out there, right? Yeah. On this show, we've talked about scientific ideas that have existed. I mean, climate change was first proposed in like the 60s.
Yeah.
Right, as a model of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Element 115 has been suggested to exist, since basically the periodic table was formed, right? Like, we can predict all these elements should exist.
Yes.
But it wasn't first produced until 2003. But again, people who don't know about kind of atomic, just don't have that background knowledge, or are already prone to believe, when they read that element 115 was finally synthesized, they're thinking Bob Lazar was proven right by science.
Well, are we piloting ships with it? We're not.
Well,
so it's like, is it doing what he says? Is it taking the form and function of what he says it was going to? No.
But that's the beauty, though, of predictions like this, is that they're open-ended, right? Like,
yeah.
Okay, we haven't made a stable 115 yet. What if this stuff with us finding 115 or making 115 in these colliders is just the government getting ready to do disclosure of UFO technology to us?
Oh, chicken nugget.
Right?
No.
Like, that's the kind of arguments that are going on, though, right? Now, here's the other part of this that Lazar again got right in a kind of an unintended way, I think. Was at the time, so since around the 1930s, there have been theories out there that there would exist what's known as the Island of Stability. Now, we've talked about this in other episodes.
Yes.
Essentially, what it is that the
where I want to go for vacation, just once.
Right, exactly. The magic number of protons and neutrons kind of in there. Protons and neutrons also exist in shells, similar to how electrons exist in orbitals, right? Or kind of around a nucleus. So just like elements, if they have a full shell or a full not octet, that's kind of not true anymore. But just like when electrons have a full set of electrons in their orbital, it becomes harder for them to react because they're kind of happy being in that low energy state. The same thing is true for neutrons and protons in a nucleus, where if they hit these certain magic numbers, essentially their like proton shell is filled, and so it becomes a stable isotope. What Lazar claimed was that element 115 would be stable on the time scale of, say, like centuries. And that's what allowed it to be used to power ships, was that it wouldn't decay at the same rate as other elements near it. Now, here's the problem with that. Lazar was kind of sort of right. But it was predicted before element 115 was ever made inside of a collider that it would be on the edge of that stability island. All right?
Well, yeah.
So, now, and this is what I mean by stability. Element 115 exists for milliseconds before it shrinks out of existence.
So how could he have even gotten anything out of... How could he have snuck out the tiny bit he did from the government?
Well, his argument would be essentially that his is the stable 115 that we have yet to discover.
Oh, and ours is the unstable.
Right.
The unstable stepchild of the legit.
Right.
115. So again, here's my beef with all of this argument. It's like everything you're saying scientifically totally adds up, but it's also just all conspiracy. It's like there's no way to disprove him without it strengthening the argument, right?
Well, it is the perfect conspiracy story because it has enough scientific-ish stuff to sound right. It even has enough science in it to sound right to someone who would consider themselves to be like a pretty savvy consumer of science news.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, yeah.
Like if you know enough about, if you listen to this show, say, as your primary source of scientific information or whatever, God help you.
Yeah.
Right? But if we are, if all you know about science is kind of pop science and stuff, Bob Lazar's story seems perfectly credible because it really doesn't sound, besides him meeting aliens, on the outside, it doesn't sound that much more crazy than, say, I just read a story in the paper the other day, or the paper online, that was like, scientists have discovered a shrinky ray. And like, no, they didn't. They just found a way to copy a big thing as a really small replica of it. Like it's you know what I mean? It's it's like saying I have a shrinky ray too because I've built a model of a battleship. My shrinky ray is just really slow and requires a lot of glue and cussing. Like I don't
Totally. No, I think of it, but the rest of his story too, it's like, so even if his science is quasi-science, right, is in the ballpark and is enough to sway minds, the rest of it, to me, it's just like, the rest of it's trope. Like, why is it not, again, like, where is any other tangible evidence? And of course, there's reasons, like conspiratorial thinking is like, as soon as you bring up something, there's something that would counter that argument to make it stronger. So it's like, it's unwinnable. But the simple fact is like, we're not powering ships with this stuff. The government's not powering ships with this stuff. Because if they were, somebody would know about it and it would be out there. This is my general, we're probably going to get some backlash on this, so sorry guys. This is my general argument with everything, with sort of the next step beyond sciences. It's like the government is we're not that good. We're not that good at this stuff. If we're that good at this stuff, we would be really, really, we would be good as our science fiction wants us to be. But I don't think that we are. I think that the bare minimum that they keep confidential is confidential, but to keep something like alien reverse engineering alien technology, we're not that good at it. People just aren't that smart. They're not that coherent. They talk a lot, Right.
This
stuff would come out. Sorry.
No, it's fun. I mean, the other part of this that I think is kind of crazy is
coming down.
The idea that, so okay, I generally, like, on the merits of his story alone, Bob Lazar, there's no evidence at all that we haven't even gotten into kind of the seedier parts of his life.
Yeah, don't even need to.
We don't need to, right? Yeah. But if you want to Google it, you can. But like, it's just there's so much there to pick at and say this doesn't make any sense, right? Now, and honestly, I think anyone who grew up being interested in science knew a Bob Lazar growing up, right? I knew a kid who on the first day of high school told me and my best friend Richie that he had a how did he describe it? It was insanity. He said he had an amphibious boat car that him and his dad had built, and he was using it. He would have driven it to school that day, but he was taking the bus to seem like all the other kids.
Dope.
Like, people make up crazy stories for attention about how smart they are and about how capable they are of this stuff and how
different.
Exactly, how unique and special they are to the world. Yeah. And, at the end of the day, all of the evidence we have suggests that Bob Lazar is a part-time science enthusiast, full-time, kind of photography tech kind of guy.
Yeah.
And that's not even what he does now. He does other things that are, again, Google it. But, okay. Now, the part of this that to me makes I think is the most compelling part of this story, actually, has nothing to do with Bob Lazar. It has everything to do with all of the other figures in the UFO community around him. Now, the other part of the story that makes Lazar so intriguing for people is that he went off the grid for like 20 years. He didn't do interviews. He was like, what I said is what I said. My story is out there. I have nothing else to add. I haven't been back. I don't know anything else. There's nothing else I can add to this story. Now, the cynic would say that the hole started getting poked into his story and he clammed up. Like any good kind of showman, you leave him wanting more.
Right.
And you go at the peak of your popularity. You don't stay around to shave your head and dangle your baby out a window. You go after Thriller, right? You finish after Thriller.
That's really, those are some words to live by. Yes.
Yeah.
You go. You call it a day after Thriller.
Yeah. And that's kind of what Lazar tried to do, was he tried to go out after Thriller. He was at the peak of his popularity. People wanted to interview him, whatever. The only person he was giving any kind of time to was George Knapp. Now, the UFO kind of, the internal kind of politics story that goes around is that Lazar was reached out to by a certain person whose name rhymes with gigolo.
Oh, for the love of God, really?
Okay, yes.
Yes.
And that this person decided that he was full of it and didn't want to work with him. Now, and here's the interesting thing, though. The source of the vast majority of the Bigelow information we have, the source of the To the Stars Academy information we have, and the source of the Lazar information we have all comes from a single person, George Knapp. Now,
switcheroo, you thought we were talking about Bob Lazar, but no. Sorry, it was like a Job moment from Arrested Development.
No, I mean, we are talking about Bob Lazar.
We are.
And I mean, and listen, well, and so there's a lot of like conspiracy kind of things that go around about that too, right? Of well, who's this reporter that comes out with this stuff, whatever. I don't know Mr. Knapp, right? But it would seem to me that he's like the only reporter really worth his salt that takes this seriously in any kind of sense of the word, right? All the other ones kind of quickly turn to cattle mutilation or, alien stole my baby kind of stories. So, Knapp is probably one of the more serious figures in the field. So it kind of makes sense that he would be the one to get these stories. But I think that story of kind of the personalities there is fascinating. And I kind of wish personally I had more info on it, because you got to wonder, right? Like you got Elizondo saying that the government had this program that was essentially looking at videos and being like, it's a UFO, right? Like the government didn't know what they were looking at. They hired this guy to essentially scour the internet for UFO videos and look at them and whatever. And then you have Lazar saying, on the other hand, the government, those were the government's planes. The government had those UFOs themselves. We were the ones flying those. So it's either, and so the argument that people have made to me online about this is, well, it's black hat, white hat operations, and one hand, we're
not that good.
One hand doesn't necessarily wash the other, and like, whatever.
No. I just don't believe that siloed operations are that coordinated to be able to pull something to that magnitude off, to the magnitude that would affect the whole of human existence. We're not that organized. We're just not. There's nothing wrong with that, because if you think about like all of the operating bits and pieces that would have to be perfectly in play for not just 1 year, but a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, years and years and years to sustain that. I just don't. I mean, just look at like a government operation. As soon as you start to take it apart, it's made up of, faulted individual people that all have their own agendas that will write a book the moment something goes south.
Well, yeah. The other crazy kind of part of this to me is like, why would the government? First off, why would the aliens work with us in the first place? That's question one.
Well,
right?
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
do we, we don't like, I don't know, the first cow to stand on its hind legs and be like, we wish to treaty with you. I think we'd shoot that cow. We'd get rid of that. We'd be like, we got to stop this from happening. We got to stop them from rising up, right? Like, on top of that too, I don't really get the number of people that would be required to work at a facility. Like, I guess part of the argument is people like, well, it is secret. Like, the amount we know about Area 51 is limited, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like, I don't know.
Because maybe there's nothing going on.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's because it's mostly boring, right? Like, my friends that were in the Army, their stories about being in the Army are working for the government are essentially like, sat on my butt a lot. Like, I was really bored. And then sometimes I had to risk my life. Like,
moments of terror punctuated by long periods of tedium. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, it's not, I don't know. There's just no reason to think the world is that cool. There's no reason to think the world is that magical.
Well, I think that we want the world to be that magical, and that's why these things propagate. Like, don't get me wrong, I would love there to be some sort of master plan Area 51 thing, because that's really, really interesting. But I think it's interesting because, what I know about science is mundane and hard, right? Like, knowing about things and learning about things is really hard. It takes a long time. And when you get there, you find out that maybe, there isn't some sort of element that's going to all of a sudden create rocket shoes, right? I mean, there's no correlation, there's no payoff. There's no payoff like that necessarily. Maybe, but not always. Very seldom. But like with the idea of like an Area 51, man, anything can happen. It's this awesome, all-encompassing, fascinating idea that just keeps breathing life into the idea that like somebody like a Bob Lazar could be from MIT. Why not? I mean, maybe everything you're reading online has been fabricated by the government, Chris, and he's got this entire, because they had to wipe all of the information on him, and it's all a cover up, right? I mean, that's the thing is, it's like you get to spin that stuff a million different ways, but what it comes down to is like, where is it? So right now, are we any closer to the government disclosing alien life and their relation to us? No.
No,
I don't think so. No. And not because they don't want to, because they probably mixed feelings about it, but I think it's because they just don't have the organized efforts to be able to do so.
I think right now the government would love to be able to point to an alien and be like, "Look over there! Stop looking at my buildings!"
Aliens!
Like
aliens!
Yeah, I think we would love to have that.
There's aliens. Yes, I agree with you on both sides of the fence.
Absolutely. Are you kidding me? We would love that to be like, the Democrats like, "Look over there! It's he's not 85 years old." Oh boy. Anyways, yeah, it's an interesting story. I think the reason that it keeps coming up, right? And this is this is like our podcast thesis statement coming to life.
Somebody give us some funding. Yeah.
The difference between science and pseudoscience is pseudoscience never dies. No. It comes back.
And it's always fun. It's always more fun.
Well, it's always more fun, but it always
fun and sexy and crazy.
It always comes back, but it kind of dressed up in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? So the Bob Lazar story is almost a perfect example of that. Of this story was essentially torn to shreds by Stanton Friedman. Mm-hmm. It fell off the face of the earth. No people still talked about him, whatever, but it was like essentially the damage was done. We kept talking about Area 51. Suddenly we were talking about all this crazy junk and whatever. But, the source of those claims was never really explicitly talked about as far as modern kind of major UFO stuff, discussions, documentaries was going on.
Right.
And so it comes up at this kind of opportune time for this story, which has some people wondering, well, is this kind of a similar... the one area where government conspiracies have come true in the past is the government trying to spread disinformation.
Yes.
And, we see it in the history of UFO research. It comes up a lot when we're trying to hide nefarious things the government actually is doing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of a time period where I think a lot of people are wondering, well, is this documentary coming out, and then the Two of the Stars stuff and all this other thing, is that a government conspiracy or something else? I don't think it is. I mean, it just seems like good marketing, right?
Yeah. I'm with you. I think the government does a lot of messed up stuff, right? I mean, we've done formalized, unformalized, in any kind of branch. We have done some horrific things to ourselves and to other people, but and when called to be accountable for it, I do think that there's a certain amount of, oh my God, I can't even say it.
Obfuscation?
Yes, we'll hide it. We'll do everything we can to hide it. But the thing is it does always somehow come to light at some point, or some portion of it. Like, even with a really good recent example, I think, is Facebook, right? So Facebook, a private company, I know, but they have put a certain amount of effort into telling you certain things, right, consistently. But again, it's still, and it's like a microcosm example, but we're still finding out stuff. Somebody lets something out, there's some sort of trackable information, and all of a sudden, everything that they're saying that was one way is completely a different way. So that's why I think it's just, you can't sustain this type of stuff. You can't sustain, I would love for it to be an Area 51. It would just be a lot of work, right? Think about the poor beleaguered, shadow government figures that have to keep this stuff going. I mean, damn, man, they're probably like, again with the reporter whose mind we have to wipe. It's tiresome.
That's kind of the last point of this I'll say, right, is that journalists get murdered all the time for way less than disclosing the biggest secret in mankind's history.
Yes.
Okay? A guy, Jamal Khashoggi, just got ripped apart because he was like, Saudi Arabia is kind of not a great place to live, you guys. I don't know if you knew that.
Yes.
Right? It's crazy to me to think that he'd be dead. Bob Lazar would be dead. If what Bob Lazar was saying is true, he would be dead.
Yes. Well, yeah. There would be no reason for him to be kept alive. And even if he was kept alive, I mean, again, imagine the government body that would have to be sustaining that generation after generation. Like, that's a huge conspiracy. That's a lot. And those people are tired, man. They don't get vacation. They don't get to, they probably get very little time away from Area 51 and being in a bunker. They probably are bored because a lot of the time, they're not reverse engineering alien stuff. They're just babysitting. And
ridiculous.
That shit's tiresome. Sorry, that's
ridiculous,
tiresome.
Marie. I'm angry. All right, that's it for this week's episode of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I've been your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my co-host, Marie Mayhew.
Woohoo! And we just went and debunked a whole bunch of good stuff. Sorry.
We did. Doing so well.
Merry Christmas. Oh, happy holidays. Whichever. We'll debunk it. No.
This episode and all others are copyright the Mad Scientist Podcast.
Yes, trademark. Yeah. All rights reserved. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.
It has been. All right.